Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It's going out a tiny bit early because I'm getting ready for the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo, which is Saturday and Sunday. I really hope to see as many of you there that could make it. It's once again Saturday at 11:30 a.m. in Panel Room 2. So I always love doing these things. I love meeting everybody in person. So I'm sure it's going to be just as good of a time as last time. But anyway, let's jump into the Q&As. First up is a name I am sure to mess up. RetroTink. Sorry, you're going to have to explain that one to me. Question is there any update on the Core-U transcoder? I believe that's the composite and S-Video to RGB for use with the OSSC. And the last I heard, Matt had posted that they were still working on it, but it's not ready. So I'm not really sure what's up with that. That's one of those devices that's a very niche device, but it would absolutely serve a purpose. So I hope that they do release it. I understand why they might be spending their efforts on other things, because that's not something that's going to sell thousands. That's something that'll probably sell a few hundred. Now, I could be wrong, and I've certainly been wrong in the past on this, but I'll keep everybody updated, and as soon as there's any kind of pre-order or release date or something like that, I'll definitely post on the website. John, the owner of Tasty Chicken in Bensonhurst, aka Tasty John, had a question about early adopting new technology. And basically, when you buy stuff when it first comes out, you could get lucky, like people who bought the first plasmas, those probably lasted quite a while as far as performance and stuff goes. There's always a chance of missing. I remember I was drooling over a rear projection TV that looked phenomenal, and I think it was like 15 grand, and the next year, the next thing that came out destroyed it. They stopped making that one model rear projection, so luckily I didn't buy that, but I could see the appeal on both sides. And in the context of early adopting, so knowing that it could be a fail, he wanted to know my thoughts on the new Hisense short throw projection TV. So basically, you get essentially like a projector that sits where your sound bar normally would, and it projects on top of a 120-inch screen. And, there's a few things that immediately give me pause about this. First of all, I'm by no means a projector expert, but from what I've learned over the years, some of the things that are always going to be a defining factor is the lens, the glass on the lens, and then how you're able, the focal distance and how you're able to project that image. So something like a short throw projector might not really ever have a chance against something like a $12,000 real projector. Because that's the price point of this TV for anybody just listening audio only. It's about 13 grand. So that immediately I would kind of be a little wary of. Now, maybe they cracked it. I certainly, like I said, I'm no expert, but that would kind of, give me a little bit of a hesitation, but also the quantity in which things are built. So anytime you talk about early adopting, I always think back to the company I worked for that sent me to CES every year. And one of the things I saw was SED TVs. And the demo just blew me away. I'd never seen anything like it, to be honest with you. So at that point, something that size and that quality, which we have now with OLED, but not then. But it turned out that a fight between Toshiba and Canon, as well as the fact that they'd have to build a brand new billion-dollar manufacturing facility, ended up killing that technology. So it's, one of the reasons why something's so expensive is because it costs more to make. And when you buy stuff like this, it might not ever really get to the point where it's mass manufactured and tweaked. So I don't know. It's an excellent question. But taking a look at this, I would be hesitant. Even if I were rich and had money to piss away, I think I would go and buy one of the insanely priced OLEDs over this at the moment. But I love talking hypothetical tech about what you could buy, what you would buy, even if you wouldn't ever actually spend the money on it. So anybody has any thoughts on this, I'd certainly love to continue the discussion about new types of TVs and stuff. But my personal opinion, this one doesn't excite me nearly as much as other stuff. James H. wanted to know if I could move the mic on its side and rotate it, or put it out of shot below me. And when I do that, what essentially ends up happening is the same thing as the lav mic, or even the first time I did this test on the weekly podcast, and that it's so far away that I'm going to need to turn up the volume so much that it's going to pick up enough background noise to just want me to, or to make me want to stick with the lav mic. I really appreciate all the comments about this though, because to be honest, I could spend 12 hours testing on every type of headphone and speaker, and I'll never even cover just a percentage of the ways other people listen. So getting other people's feedback is always way better than just trying it myself. So I do appreciate it, but I'm pretty sure this isn't going to work. But I tried it anyway while I'm answering your question just to see the difference. Kelly Greenidge wanted to know if anybody was selling Voltar's dual outputting double penetration device, as he calls it, which is a device that's designed for people that want to do direct RGB capture into something like a DataPath Vision capture card. So it's SCART input, also has a SCART output to go to another like RGB monitor or OSSC or something, and then it's got an output connector that could go directly into the capture card. I don't know anybody making those. It's an open source product, so anybody could make them. They're a bit expensive to make, but they're not too hard to assemble yourself should you want to just make a few boards and order the parts and everything. I do know that Insurrection Industries still has the single output version in stock. And in all my testing, what I preferred to do was for direct capture, so for times where I just needed, the best signal for comparison, I only just wanted one output, so it just eliminates any other point of failure whatsoever. And also, I just split my source other ways when I'm just doing direct RGB stuff. So either console to G-SCART switch and then one of the outputs into this, or console to RGB monitor and then RGB monitor into this. So if you could figure out a different way, you could just buy those from Insurrection Industries right now. The only thing about Zax is, and the one from Insurrection, I guess, is these are just designed for standard def signals, 240p and 480i and nothing else. And we're still working pretty hard behind the scenes on the follow-ups to all of this. So the component to DVI one is almost done. In fact, I think it's done. We're just in its final testing. I'll do a video on that soon, but I guess I'll show this publicly for the first time. This is pretty awesome and has a filter, a switchable filter that can go from standard def to high def and everything in between, which is really important for people doing things like oversampling and stuff like that. Then we're going to be doing a VGA version, and then we'll cycle back and think about doing the SCART version again. It's just a matter of, how do we do that? Do we make it like Zax where it's dual output? Do we do single output? Is it a bunch? But what I was more concerned with, and the reason the project's taking so long, is I wanted to make sure that the filtering was perfect and that the sync stripper that's in both Zach and the one that we designed, the 2DVI one, I wanted to make sure that we upgraded the sync stripper in these. There's nothing wrong with the ones that are in here. Nothing wrong at all, in fact. I just think that we might be able to do a little bit more with this. So I guess that's a really long way of saying, if you really need a short-term solution, that this is, the best thing you could possibly get. The, Voltar's DP board is the only solution. Contact me and I'll see what I could do. If nobody's making them, I might have an extra one. But there are other ways to get dual signal that might work easier for you at the moment. I still think just getting the one from Insurrection and finding a different way to split it is probably the easiest and cheapest way to do it. And please keep your ears open for updates on any of the new 2DVI stuff that we have coming out, because I'm really proud of all the testing we've done and everything that the project is turning into. I'm going to do a separate video on this as soon as I get confirmation from the final testers that it worked as good for them as it does for me. And then I think people will be pretty impressed with the new design and stuff. So anyway, sorry for the long answer, but super short version, contact me if you really need one of these, but look into the other ones and check out Insurrection Industries for their sale of the SCART to DVI. Jared Breland had an interesting question. What's the best way with the best quality to get an unmodded N64 connected to a component video switch, not HDMI? He's trying to eliminate S-Video, and N64 is the last holdout. In the future, he may splurge on an RGB mod, but would like to stick to a more plug-and-play solution for now. There is no way. You could try to do things like take an S-Video cable, get the one from Retro Access, cut the S-Video connector off, and make it two RCAs. And then essentially you would, instead of like red and green, let's just say, you would put chroma and luma. But then on the other end of that switch, you would have to make sure that the target source knew that that was S-video as well. So there's really no way to do it. And there's also no way to creatively convert S-video or something to component. I think the only thing that really you might want to look into is trying to find one of the original, which is pretty easy to find, but one of the original released versions of the N64 that can do the easy mod, and then get one of the very cheap boards and either do it yourself or have somebody do it for you. But to RGB mod an original N64 is one of the easiest mods you can do, as long as you're just patient and you follow some instructions. Just use some flux, don't stick the wires all the way through the board, basic stuff that both Zach and I have done videos on, and then get some HD Retrovision cables. And in fact, if you're using the HD Retrovision cables, you only need to worry about 3 wires, RGB. You don't even need to worry about sync. And then there you go. There's your component video solution. So this is one of those times, which unfortunately is very common in the retro gaming world, where what you think might be an easy question is way more complicated. And I mean that respectfully, of course, but there's just no way to take an unmodded N64, which would only output S-video or component, and get it into a component switch without sending it S-video. Or modding the console. So I would definitely recommend, even if you have to buy another N64 and keep your original, maybe it's sentimental or something like that. But if you just buy a second one, buy a cheap $30 board, just be patient and mod it, or have somebody do it for you, and then get some HD Retrovisions. Not only is it going to be at least a small video upgrade, I think composite to S-video is a bigger jump in quality than S-video to RGB, but it'll be a jump in quality, and you'll be able to use the switch that you want to use, all for not too much effort compared to other things. It's not nearly as hard as if you had like an original NES and wanted to do the same thing. So I'm sorry there's no easy plug and play solution. The only other thing that you could do is get the RetroTink and a good S-video cable and have just HDMI, which you said that's not really what you are into right now. So I'm sorry I don't have any better news, but at least there is a good solution out there that's not going to break the bank on you. Castlemania Ryan had a good question. First, he just bought a Core Graphics and a Core Graphics 2 and wants advice on modding for region modding and for RGB. I believe GameTech still sells a region mod kit. If you don't want to install that, you could get the PC Henshin, which DB Electronics open sourced, and I believe one company is making them legally, following the open source licenses and all that. So that way you could use Hue cards and not have to worry about modding at all. You just have something kind of sticking out the end. As far as the RGB mod, there's 2 ways to go about this. So first and foremost, if you have 2 consoles that you want to mod, it might be easier overall to just get something like the DB Graphics Booster, the SSD S3. There might be another product coming out, which I may or may not be able to talk about soon, that all use the Genesis 2 connector. So you essentially just use your HD Retrovision cables and the Genesis 2 connector, and you're done, and that's it. If you don't want plug and play, let's say you're always going to be swapping between the CD drive and other stuff, to do an internal mod is interesting. So I could be remembering this wrong, but I think the original Core Graphics had an RF port on the side. And if that were the case, I would do the typical, I don't know how typical it is, but what we all in the Retro Roundtable and friends have been doing for a while, in that you remove the RF jack, and then you solder a Genesis 2 port upside down to the motherboard itself, which is a little bit tedious, but if you do it right, that's a solid connection. And then just use any of Voltar's mods to get RGB and run it to that. So once again, there you go. There's your internal mod with HD Retrovision cables using the Genesis 2 adapter. If you have a Core Graphics 2, you could do something like that, where you do something upside down, but I think a better thing to do would be replacing that output connector with one that fits right in its place and looks the same. And I think there are people out there that are making that style connector to Genesis 2 converters for this exact reason. Now, of course, it's not officially supported by HD Retrovision at all, but if you do a Voltar mod and you install it right, it'll definitely work, no doubt. Just keep in mind that the PC Engine signal is very finicky and some devices won't like it, but that has nothing to do with the HD Retrovision stuff. That would be the exact same scenario if you had an RGB mod. So My advice is definitely try to stick with the externals just because it'll be easier and you don't even have to worry about adapters. You just, buy the stuff, plug it in, and it works. And also, a strong bit of advice is go to console5.com and check out their cap fixes, because the jail bar fix is only 2 SMD caps per console. And yes, it's SMD, it's a pain in the ass. It's, if you're not used to it, you're definitely going to shoot one across the room the first time you solder it on. But just by replacing those 2 capacitors, eliminated all the jail bars and that super graphics I was using for my PC Engine video. So I would definitely do that no matter what at some point, but you don't need to get your RGB. You could just buy like the graphics, DB graphics booster and the HD Retrovision cables, and you're done. So hopefully I pointed you in the right direction. Darkstar7 had a few questions. I guess he's using a RetroTink 2X to convert component video to RGB. So component video in pass-through mode to, I would assume, an HDMI to VGA converter with the sync combined. That's just what I'm guessing. Definitely not what I would have suggested, but I'm sure it would work. But one of the downsides of this is the RetroTink always has the color bars on, which the way I use it, I find it very handy because now I know where to track down if there's a problem. It's obviously on the console end because if you see color bars, the Tink 2X is working. But with his situation, he's using a switch. So if it's an auto switch and this is always on when it's plugged in, then obviously that's not going to work for you. So unfortunately, no, there's no way to turn that off, and there's no way to convert the video without power. But you did also mention that when you unplugged it from USB power, the input light stayed on. So this concerned me. So I just plugged this in a second ago and checked myself, and as soon as I unplugged the USB power, all the lights went off. So you might want to double check that. I'm not sure if something's up, but if your light stays on, maybe we have a different revision. It's always possible. But let me know. I'd want to triple check for you just in case. But to be honest, I'm not sure if this is the best way I would convert component to RGB. I think there's somebody out there working on a new converter for that now. This might be a great solution in the short term, but you even mentioned things like composite video blooms a little bit when doing it that way, just like on your Extron converter. I just think, going from those analog signals to HDMI and back to RGB, there's things that could happen in that conversion, whereas just, component to HDMI, you should be fine. So I don't know. I'm not really sure what's the best way to deal with that. The other part, too, is, of course, with composite video, I might not notice or mind that much if I noticed a little bit of quality difference doing all those conversions, just because composite's as noisy as you could imagine anyway. So I'll try to look into another solution, and I'll try to remember who was making the component to RGB converter. The Garo's out there, but I think we discussed that in the past. I don't quite understand your second question, though. My apologies. I think what you're asking is, do we know exactly how much lag the undammed USB adapter adds? In my testing, it was like a millisecond or less. I believe Undammed himself said it could vary, but it's not going to be much, and I don't think it's going to be stuff that would actually affect real-world performance. I haven't really dug so deep into sub one frame testing of lag, other than just the basic oscilloscope testing. But I just don't think it's something you would need to worry about. But the other part of your question I don't understand is you mentioned something about the Mister, and after the recent update, you have an Xbox controller that where the lag increased. So do you mean the undammed adapter increased lag, the Mister increased lag? If you could just clarify, I'll try my best to clarify. But sorry I didn't understand that. I did try, my bad. But yeah, definitely double check the RetroTink, because my light definitely doesn't stay on. Jim Nardashia's RGB setup is progressing nicely, and he had a few questions about cabling. So he wants to keep his PVM a bit away from where the consoles are hooked up, so we'd like to run a cable through the drop ceiling to keep it out of sight. But that means he'd need about 20 feet. So is it silly to even attempt to run a cable that long for performance reasons? I wouldn't use the word silly, but you could very realistically see a difference. There's scenarios we talk about all the time, whether it's me, the Retro Roundtable, whatever else, where we talk about these theoretical scenarios that may or may not affect you. And this is one of the real world scenarios that you probably would see a difference. Because remember, the analog signal, the longer the signal, the more degradation of the signal. I mean, it's also a world of convenience, right? All that preaching about long cables being said, I did have a setup in one of my old apartments where the main test TV was like 25 feet away. And yeah, I mean, you could actually see interference, but if I just needed to flip a console on to test a game or something, whatever. So there is, an up and down to all that. 2, what's better to use, a really long SCART cable or a short SCART to BNC and really long BNCs? Definitely really long BNCs just because it's going to be cheaper and easier overall. You could probably find 20 feet of BNC cables that are very thick and well shielded, so you really just got to deal with the other stuff. And do you have recommendations for where to purchase long cables? Try monoprice.com. I've gotten a lot of my BNC cables from there. But overall, I would try to get creative with this. So, just try to think of any way to shave some distance off between everything. Maybe you put the consoles, in one spot, and then the G-SCART in the middle, and then that way the G-SCART is the middle position of everything, so you're utilizing the full length of the console cables, and the full length of a basic, SCART to BNC cable or something. I would just, try to get creative with shortening the lengths as best you can, and see how it works. If you don't notice any interference, then I'd definitely call it a win. Mike G had an interesting question. He said he's considering purchasing a Sega Blast City candy cab from a friend and is wondering if you could use it with as a monitor for console gaming as well. So while I've played on a bunch of Blast Cities and I've helped work on a bunch of candy cabs, I don't really know how it's interfaced between the arcade boards and the screen. So it's a tri-sync monitor. So if you just have something like a VGA cable in it, you should be able to just have some kind of sync splitting circuit. So for example, output all of your consoles to like a G-SCART switch, and then from the G-SCART into an Extron RXI, and then from the output of the Extron RXI, you could use RGB HV. So now instead of RGB-S, it's RGB HV. This 5 signals like a VGA cable uses, and that should work if there's a VGA port or BNC connectors. But if it uses a type of JAMA, that's where I'm not really 100% sure on. You would have to find some kind of SCART to JAMA adapter. I don't remember if they did exist, but I don't think they're well made or often made anymore. And this is definitely something where you might want to use or borrow an oscilloscope to double check voltages. I loved the Blast City cabs. I love the look of them. I considered buying one myself, and to be perfectly honest, if I had the storage for one, I would love one. A tri-sync monitor. You could you build yourself a switch so you could have it as an emulation box and for real arcade boards. I mean, it would just be awesome overall. So, definitely I would try to buy it, but that's a great question, and I would look more into it. And I think you can go to places like arcadeprojects.com and ask there, people that work on this stuff every day. And it really is just the basics of you're buying a Blast City and you want to plug a Super Nintendo and or an Xbox 360 VGA into it. What do I need? And hopefully they'd be able to help you out. But that's a good question that unfortunately I don't have a great answer for. Phil Welker said that he was planning on outputting component video via HD Retrovision cables to an LCD and composite to a CRT. He wants to know that since some HD Retrovisions take sync from composite video, does that mean he can't output simultaneously because you'd be using composite video twice? Excellent question. On Super Nintendo and Genesis, you would not be able to do that because you'd be drawing double the signal from composite. So not only would your composite output go dark, but it would be, it could blow out the video chip. You could, however, use S-Video on the consoles that use it because that wouldn't be the same pins at all. But if you're talking about PlayStation 1, not only can you do that because their PlayStation 1 cables get sync from Luma, So not only can you do that, but you could even get one of those PS1s that have the composite ports right in the back, not needing any mod whatsoever. So it's a good question. Unfortunately, not for SNES or Genesis. And it's something that I do. In fact, I do this all the time for lag testing and testing things like the pound cables. I did exactly that. I had the pound cable plugged in, and then a composite video out to the device and was able to test it like that. So good question. And also, you said you asked this after I'd finished the Q&A last week, so you re-asked it here. I just wanted to remind everybody that sometimes I miss a question, I delete my answer by accident before it hits Adobe Premiere. So if for whatever reason I missed your question, definitely please re-ask it. I never mean to skip a question. In the history of all 60-something of these that I've done, this would have been I have never intentionally just skipped a question. It's always been a mistake when I skipped one. So sorry about that, Phil, and hope that answered your question properly. And lastly, Jeremiah Jackson has an awesome question that I've tried to record the answer to like 4 times now, but I keep going off on a tangent because I love talking about this, but I'm not really sure if this is the right place for an hour-long lecture on it. Jeremiah wants to know if I have a list of recommended beers, with only qualification being no light beers on the list. So rather than talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes like I was about to go down that rabbit hole and talk about beer, I think I'll just answer your question directly, and then maybe another time I'll have a friend for a podcast, and we'll just do a beer podcast or something. But my being that I live in the city now, and my choices are limited because while there's tons and tons of really awesome wine stores and liquor stores, for whatever reason, I think there's a New York law that says you can't sell beer in the same place that you sell wine and liquor. So there aren't any beer stores near me. So I'm limited to whatever the places within walking distance have. So my recommended beer is get the best out of what you could find when you need it, which is a cheesy answer. But the truth is, like, I used to love to get weird things like the Trooper beer, it sounds like a gimmick, and I bought it for the gimmick parts of it, but I actually really like that beer. I love dark beers like Founder's Porter and some really good stouts. And I like anything that's not artificially flavored. So I had like maple bacon beer once. It was gross. It left like a film in my mouth, like when you have the pump flavoring at Starbucks or something. So like good pure beers, any of the Schwartz beers that like the dark German beers that are made pure and all that stuff. Those are definitely what I gravitate towards if I have a choice. Dark beers or some randoms that I've just found over the years that I really enjoyed. But around here, when you're kind of limited, I love Modelo and Sapporo, and some places around here have Negro Modelo, which is just the dark version of it, which is great. That's one of my favorite beers anyway, to be honest with you. It doesn't have too high of an alcohol content, but I really love the way it tastes. I always have. And in a pinch, I still like PBR. And when I moved here, I tried to hunt down the cheapest beer that I could stand, because sometimes when if you want a beer and you don't know where to go, one place will sell a tall boy for $4, another place will sell a tall boy for $15, and you got to just settle sometimes. And I tried a bunch, and there were so many terrible beers out there. And out of all the cheap ones, PBR was the one that I never hated. It's not my favorite. I would never wake up one morning and go, if only I had a PBR. But get whatever you can when the time allows it. But if you are lucky enough to live in a place that has a large selection of beers, something dark and pure made, nothing artificially flavored, is definitely what I would recommend. But it's an acquired taste, right? It's just like anything else. So what I love might be something that you don't like at all, and vice versa. But yeah, definitely, it's definitely been an interesting time learning how to buy beer again when you have to be in walking distance and you have a much more limited selection than you're used to. But yeah, anytime I see something dark, I go for it. I do love Guinness, but I like the other dark beers better. And I usually end up just getting Negro Modelo or like a tall boy of Sapporo, just because it's easy, it's there. I'm not going to get ripped off, and there's not much other choices in my little neighborhood here. So, but yeah, man, I could talk about this for a long time. So I will try to fit this in somewhere else at some point and have a good old beer discussion. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. And any question at all that you have, whether it's retro gaming related, beer related, or whatever, just post wherever you support in the latest Q&A. The way it's set up, I can't really go back through all of the rest, so just find the latest Q&A post and post your question there. As you saw this week, if something happens and I don't get to it, just please repost it. It's definitely just a mistake. And that's pretty much it. Also, I hope to see as many people as I can at the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo this weekend. I'll be there both days. I'll be attending a bunch of panels. I'll have my own panel, 11:30 a.m. on Saturday. And whenever I'm not wandering around, I will be hanging out at the Brooklyn Video Games booth. So if you're around and you see me, please come over and say hi. I really enjoy talking to everybody and meeting people and hearing all their cool retro gaming stories. So, well, that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time. Or hopefully this weekend.